Hello! Today we're going to go through every single game in the Granny and Slendrina series in order. I'm making this because I genuinely love every game that Denis Vukanovic has made, and I think this franchise deserves a proper breakdown. So what exactly is Slendrina, and what is Granny? Well, Slendrina is actually the granddaughter of Granny, making Granny a great-grandmother. She always looks terrifying, but this video is really about her backstory, and how she hasn't always been this cruel. By the end of this, the whole family is going to make a lot more sense. Let's start from the very beginning. Slendrina, 2013. To understand where this franchise is today, you have to go back to a very simple, very dark basement. No introduction, no cutscene, no explanation. You just wake up in the dark holding a flashlight, and somewhere in this maze of shadowy corridors are 6 pieces of paper that you need to find. That is your entire objective. Find the papers, get out. Simple enough, right? Except the moment you start moving, you realize something is in here with you. You catch a glimpse of a pale figure at the end of a hallway. Long, dark hair, a white dress, eyes that seem to glow even in complete darkness. That is Slendrina, and the game immediately communicates one rule without ever saying a word. Do not look at her. If Slendrina catches your gaze for even a second, the screen flashes, a shriek tears through your speakers, and you are dead. Back to the start. No second chances. This is the gaze mechanic, and it is the foundation that this entire franchise was built on. It forced you to navigate the entire basement while staring at the floor, which sounds simple until you realize you have no idea where she is going to appear next. She could be at the end of the hallway you just turned into. She could be right behind you. She could materialize directly in front of your face in a corridor you were absolutely certain was empty 2 seconds ago. The tension of not knowing created a specific kind of dread that jump scares alone could never manufacture. It was not about what you saw, it was about what you were desperately trying not to see. And this was 2013, right in the middle of the creepypasta era. Slender Man was everywhere. People were passing around stories online, playing Slender the 8 pages, terrifying themselves and their friends. Slendrina arrived at exactly the right cultural moment and plugged directly into that collective fear. A ghostly girl connected to the Slender Man mythology, haunting a basement, killing you with her gaze. It was viral before viral was even a reliable strategy. But here is what is really interesting about this first game in hindsight. There was no story. None at all. No lore, no family, no explanation for who Slendrina was, or why she was in that basement, or what she wanted from you. She was just there, and she was deadly, and that was enough. But that absence of story became the game's greatest accidental asset. Players started filling in the blanks themselves. Forum threads appeared. Fan theories multiplied. Who was she? Was she human once? Was she connected to something bigger? And the developer DV Loper was paying attention. Those fan theories would eventually become official lore. What started as a simple survival experiment would grow into a universe. But none of that happens without this basement, this flashlight, and 6 pieces of paper. This is patient zero. This is where everything begins. Slendrina, The Cellar, 2014. If the first game was an experiment, The Cellar was proof that the experiment had worked, and that it was time to go deeper. And I mean that literally. The setting moved from a basic basement into a sprawling underground bunker, a much larger and more complex environment that immediately made it clear the developer had learned a tremendous amount from the first game's success. The item count went from 6 pieces of paper to 8 books, which doesn't sound like a significant change until you realize the environment you're searching through is now filled with locked doors that require specific keys to open. Suddenly, you're not just wandering through a maze collecting things. You are managing a mental map, remembering which doors you have opened, backtracking through hallways you have already cleared, and trying to piece together the layout of a place that genuinely does not want you to understand it. The bunker felt like it was designed to confuse you. Narrow hallways that all looked identical, flickering lights that gave you just enough visibility to move, but never enough to feel safe. Rooms branching off in directions that seemed wrong somehow, like the architecture itself was shifting around you. It stopped being just a maze and started feeling like a purposeful prison, something built specifically to keep you disoriented and afraid. The sound design in this game took a massive leap forward, and I think this is genuinely underappreciated when people talk about the series. The original game used high-pitched screams and sudden appearances to build tension, which worked but was fairly blunt as a technique. The Cellar introduced something far more effective: those wet, echoing gasps. If you have played this game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That specific sound, somewhere between a breath and a sob, reverberating off the walls of the underground corridors. Hearing it meant she was close. Hearing it get louder meant you needed to change direction immediately. It became Slendrina's signature audio cue across the entire franchise, and it started right here. The atmosphere shifted from startling to genuinely unsettling because of that sound. You were no longer just reacting to sudden appearances. You were listening constantly, interpreting audio cues, trying to locate a threat you could not look at directly. Slendrina's AI also became noticeably more aggressive and more intelligent in this entry. In the first game, she would appear somewhat randomly, which was frightening, but also manageable once you understood the pattern. In the Cellar, she learned to teleport directly into your line of sight. She would anticipate where you were moving and position herself in the corridor ahead of you, so that the moment you turned a corner, you were already looking at her. It meant that running was no longer a viable strategy. You had to slow down. You had to check every corner before committing to a direction. Careful, methodical movement became the only way to survive. And that shift in required playstyle made the whole experience feel like a significant evolution from what came before. This is the first game in the series that felt truly polished. The first one that felt like a complete horror experience rather than a proof of concept. And it set the standard that every game after it would be measured against. House of Slendrina 2014. Now we need to talk about this one carefully because House of Slendrina is arguably the most important game in the entire franchise from a lore perspective. Not the scariest, not the most mechanically refined, but the most important. And the reason for that is simple. This is the game where the story actually began. The setting moved from underground spaces into a domestic home. A real house with bedrooms and kitchens and living rooms and family photographs on the walls. And that shift in environment changed everything about how the game communicated with the player. The previous two games told you nothing about Slendrina because they had no way to tell you anything. A basement and a bunker are empty spaces. But a home is full of information. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every photograph is a piece of a life that someone once lived. Walking through this house, you were not just searching for keys to a central safe. You were reading the environmental story of a family. And somewhere in that house, hidden among the domestic details, was a portrait. And that portrait contained the single biggest lore revelation the series had produced up to that point. Slender Man is Slendrina's father. Let that sit for a moment. This small mobile horror game, built on a simple gaze mechanic, had just directly connected itself to the most significant horror myth circulating on the internet at that time. Slendrina was not just a random ghost in a basement. She was the daughter of Slender Man. She had parentage, she had a family, and that family was about to get a lot more complicated. Because House of Slendrina also introduced her mother, Angeline, as a physical threat in the basement. Suddenly, the horror was coming from two directions: the supernatural, gaze-based threat of Slendrina herself, and the physical, aggressive presence of her mother hunting you through the lower levels of the house. A tag team dynamic that the series would continue to develop and expand for years. The house setting also accomplished something more subtle and more emotionally effective. It made the scares feel personal. You were not running through an anonymous maze. You were rifling through someone's bedroom drawers, opening kitchen cupboards, searching through the private spaces of a family that had clearly experienced something catastrophic. It hinted that Slendrina was not born a ghost. She was born a person, part of a household, with a mother and a father and a life. And something went terribly, irreversibly wrong. This is the moment the developer universe was officially born. Everything before this was set up. Everything after this is consequence. Slendrina. Asylum 2015. If House of Slendrina made you feel like you were uncovering the mystery of a family, Slendrina. Asylum made you feel like you were uncovering the crime that was committed against them. The setting shifted to a massive industrial medical ward. Long clinical hallways, rows of empty beds, operating rooms that had clearly seen things they should not have seen. Your objective was to collect medical files scattered throughout the facility, and those files told a story that recontextualized everything the series had shown you up to this point. Slendrina and her mother were patients here, or they were prisoners. The game is deliberately vague about which, and that ambiguity is one of the most effective narrative choices in the entire franchise, because it forces you to sit with the discomfort of not knowing. Were they brought here for treatment? Were they brought here for experimentation? Were they ever given a choice? The hallways of the asylum were longer and more disorienting than anything the series had attempted before. Rooms branched off in every direction, and the sheer number of spaces to navigate made it genuinely easy to get completely lost. The mother returned as a primary hunter in this game, chasing you through the wards with real aggression, while Slendrina continued her supernatural role as the gaze-based death sentence. Managing both threats simultaneously in an environment this large and this confusing created a specific kind of sustained anxiety that short burst scares could not replicate. And then there was the sound design, the distant sound of metal gurneys moving in the dark, not accompanied by any visible threat, not connected to any specific event, just the sound of something heavy and metal being moved by someone or something somewhere in the building. It is one of the most quietly effective horror details in the entire series, because your brain immediately starts asking questions it does not want to answer. What is being moved? Where is it going? Why can you hear it but not see it? What makes Slendrina, Asylum stand out above everything else in this period of the franchise is its emotional tone. This does not feel like a monster story. It feels like a tragedy. The games before it presented Slendrina and her mother as threats, which they were, but this game was the first to genuinely ask why they were threats. And the answer it suggested was not supernatural evil or random haunting. It was pain. It was experimentation. It was something that was done to them in this building that changed what they were forever. They were not monsters who chose to be monsters. They were people who had something monstrous done to them. That reframing of the entire franchise's central antagonists into figures of genuine tragedy is what makes this one of the most important entries in the timeline, and it remains one of the darkest and most emotionally resonant games developer has ever made. Slendrina 2D 2015. Every franchise has that one entry that nobody quite knows what to do with. And for the Slendrina series, that entry is Slendrina 2D, because developer looked at the formula that had been working. First-person perspective, three-dimensional maze environments, the gaze mechanic creating tension through spatial uncertainty, and just completely abandoned it. Slendrina 2D is a side-scrolling platformer. You move left and right, you climb ladders, you jump between floors, and Slendrina chases you as a flat 2D sprite across the screen. It is such a dramatic departure from everything the series had established that your first reaction playing it is probably something like, "What am I looking at?" And yet it works. Not in spite of being weird, but almost because of it. The gaze mechanic translated into 2 dimensions in ways that were genuinely surprising. In a 3D environment, you have a full range of directions to move in, which gives you options when Slendrina appears. You can back up, sidestep, turn around, find an alternate route. In 2D, you have left and right. That is it. So when Slendrina appeared in front of you, your instinct was to turn around and run the other direction. But turning around meant putting your back to her, which meant you were now moving blind in a direction you had not checked, toward threats you could not see. And because the levels were multi-tiered with ladders connecting different floors, you were constantly making decisions about whether it was safer to climb up or drop down, whether the floor above you was clear, whether the floor below had anything waiting. It required a fundamentally different kind of spatial awareness than the 3D games, and that freshness kept it from feeling like a simple reskin. The art style was distinctive and had a kind of hand-drawn quality that made it feel different from anything else in the franchise. It did not contribute much to the ongoing lore of the series, which is probably why it tends to get overlooked in discussions about the timeline. But as a piece of the developer's history, it is genuinely fascinating. It showed that developer was not content to just iterate on a successful formula indefinitely. They were willing to take real risks, make something genuinely strange, and trust that the audience would follow them into uncomfortable territory. That willingness to experiment would define the franchise going forward. The Child of Slendrina, 2016. By 2016, the series had established a ghost, her mother, and the revelation of her father's identity. The family tree was taking shape, and then the child of Slendrina added the most disturbing branch of all, the baby, set in a dark, ruinous outdoor environment. This game introduced a new kind of horror that the series had not attempted before. Not supernatural horror, not psychological horror, body horror. The baby was not a ghost. It was not a spirit or an apparition or something that existed only in glimpses and shadows. It was a physical entity. It crawled along the ground with rapid, jerking movements that felt deeply wrong, and every movement was accompanied by a slapping sound, hands and knees hitting the ground in a rhythm that somehow managed to be both pathetic and absolutely terrifying. The gameplay implications of introducing a ground-level physical threat were significant. Every previous game in the series had trained you to look up, to scan the hallways at eye level, to check the space directly in front of your face, to manage your gaze in the horizontal plane. The baby forced you to look down, constantly. You had to track it along the floor, watch its movements, anticipate where it was crawling, make sure it was not about to reach you. And while you were looking down, Slendrina could appear at eye level and kill you instantly. The high-low threat system made every moment of the game feel frantic in a way that was completely new. You could not just manage one threat at a time anymore. You had to split your attention vertically, maintaining awareness of the ground and the air simultaneously, and the game gave you very little margin for error. The lore implications were equally significant. The existence of a baby confirmed that the curse had passed to a third generation, which raised the obvious question of parentage. Who was the father? The game did not answer that question directly, but it planted the seed. It leaned heavily into the grotesque, using the baby's distorted cries and unnatural movements to create a kind of visceral discomfort that went beyond simple fear. This was horror that was meant to make you feel deeply, physically uneasy. And it succeeded. Slendrina, The School, 2016. There is something about an empty school at night that taps into a fear that almost everyone shares regardless of age or background. Those long, fluorescent-lit corridors that were full of noise and movement during the day become something completely different in the dark. The lockers lining the walls, the classrooms with their chairs pushed in and their chalkboards waiting. The sense that a space designed for children has been emptied of everything that made it safe. Slendrina. The school understood this instinctively and built its entire atmosphere around it. Your objectives were to find fuses to restore power to the building and books scattered throughout the classrooms and hallways. Simple enough tasks that became genuinely stressful in this environment. The mother was more aggressive in this entry than she had been in any previous game, engaging in long chase sequences through the school's corridors that used the layout's many dead ends and branching hallways to create a genuine cat and mouse dynamic. These were not brief encounters. She would pursue you across multiple rooms, and if you made a wrong turn into a dead end, there was a very real chance she was going to catch you. Surviving required both quick reflexes and a mental map of the entire building, memorized well enough to navigate at speed without thinking. But what elevated the school above, being just a more aggressive version of what came before, was the environmental storytelling, the chalkboards. Throughout the school, you would find chalkboards covered in strange drawings and half-erased words, fragments of something that might have been lessons, or might have been something else entirely. They suggested, without ever stating directly, that Slendrina had been here, that this school had been part of her life before whatever happened to her happened, that she had sat in these classrooms, walked these hallways, existed in this space as a child rather than as a ghost. It added a layer of genuine tragedy to her character. She was not just a supernatural threat. She was a restless spirit haunting a place that had once meant something to her, and the horror of her presence was inseparable from the sadness of what she had lost. Slendrina, The Cellar, 2016. If you had been following the series from the beginning, The Cellar 2 felt like a culmination. Everything the franchise had built across 6 games came together in a single experience that was designed to test everything you had learned. 3 distinct levels, the cellar, the forest, and the grave, each with its own atmosphere and layout and specific challenges. And for the first time in the series, all 3 family members were hunting you simultaneously. Slendrina, her mother, and the baby, all active at the same time, all operating with their individual behaviors and movement patterns, all converging on your location from different directions. The cellar level felt familiar but elevated, a return to the underground environment of the 2014 game, with significantly updated graphics and more complex navigation. The forest level moved outdoors and removed the safety of walls and corners, forcing you to manage your gaze in an open environment where Slendrina could appear from any direction. But the grave level was something else entirely. Navigating through a graveyard at night while 3 separate AI threats moved through the tombstones around you, each one operating differently, each one capable of ending your run in a different way. It was the closest the series had come to a genuine horror movie finale. The updated character models were more detailed and more visceral than anything the franchise had shown before, and seeing all 3 family members together in one space for the first time crystallized something important about the direction the series was heading. These were not isolated spirits haunting separate locations. They were a family, a coordinated group with shared territory and shared purpose. The Cellar 2 was the ultimate refinement of the original Slendrina formula, and it felt like a closing statement. The supernatural ghost horror chapter of this franchise was reaching its peak. Something new was coming. Slendrina, The Forest, 2017. The Forest stripped away every structural safety net the series had provided up to this point. No corridors, no rooms, no walls to use as reference points or barriers between you and what was hunting you. Just trees and fog and darkness in every direction. And somewhere out there the family was waiting. Moving through an open outdoor environment completely changed the geometry of fear in this game. In enclosed spaces, you could develop strategies based on the layout. You knew which hallways connected to which rooms, which corners were dangerous, which paths gave you enough warning to react. In the forest, there was no layout to memorize. Every direction looked the same. The fog limited your visibility, and the trees blocked your sightlines, and Slendrina could appear from anywhere at any moment. And then, among those trees, the series finally answered the question that the child of Slendrina had raised. The father of the baby was Nosferatu, a tall, pale, vampire-like figure who brought a completely different visual and tonal energy into the franchise. Where Slendrina was ghostly and ethereal and the mother was human and aggressive, Nosferatu was something older and more gothic. His presence changed the atmosphere of the series in ways that would continue to develop through the games that followed. But the most significant discovery in the forest was not Nosferatu himself. It was what you found elsewhere among the trees. Slendrina's mother, chained, imprisoned, not hunting you, not chasing you, restrained, captive, held in place by something or someone. And the implication was clear. The family was not unified. There was a violent rift running through it. Nosferatu had taken control of something, and the mother was paying the price. This chapter shifted the entire emotional focus of the series. It was no longer about ghost hunting or survival horror in the traditional sense. It was about a family in crisis, and the darkness within it was not supernatural. It was deeply, recognizably human. Slendrina X, 2017. Slendrina X felt like a genuine evolution of everything the franchise had been building toward. A massive gothic castle, multi-level rooms connected by hidden passages, complex gear-based puzzles that had to be solved just to progress through the building. You were a prisoner in the dungeons, and the entire game was structured around figuring out how to escape a space that was specifically designed to prevent exactly that. The gaze mechanic that had defined the series since 2013 was largely set aside in this entry. Slendrina appeared as a secondary supernatural threat rather than the primary danger, and the center stage was taken by Nosferatu, who moved through the castle as a stalking physical predator. His AI was patient and persistent in a way that felt fundamentally different from anything the series had done before. He would track you through rooms, anticipate your movements, appear in locations that cut off your escape routes. Hiding was possible, but not reliable. Moving quickly was possible, but noisy. Every decision about how to navigate the castle had to account for where he might be and what he might do when he found you. The puzzle elements added a layer of complexity that the series had not previously attempted at this scale. Gear mechanisms, locked sequences, items that needed to be combined or used in specific locations before progress was possible. These were not simple find-the-key objectives. They required actual thought, actual planning, actual understanding of how the castle's systems connected to each other. And while you were thinking, Nosferatu was moving. The tension of trying to solve complex puzzles while being stalked by a persistent physical threat created an experience that felt more like a professional horror title than a mobile game. But the most important thing about Slendrina X is what it built for the future. The stalking AI, the physical predator dynamic, the house full of traps and puzzles and hidden passages. All of it was the direct prototype for what came next. Without the design work done in this castle, Granny's house would never have been possible. Granny 2017. And then everything changed. Granny arrived and it changed the landscape of horror gaming in a way that very few mobile games ever have. The premise sounds simple. You are a kidnapped traveler trapped in a house, and you have 5 days to escape before something terrible happens. The house is full of puzzles and locks and hidden passages and multiple potential escape routes. All you have to do is find the right items, solve the right sequences, and get out. Except the moment you pick up your first item and it slips from your grasp and hits the floor, you learn the rule that defines everything. Granny can hear you. She is somewhere in the house, and she is blind, and she cannot find you by sight. But she hears everything, every dropped item, every squeaky floorboard, every door that closes too hard. Every sound you make is a signal, and the moment she gets a signal, she comes running with her bat, and if she finds you, she knocks you out, and you wake up in the bedroom and lose a day. The shift from the gaze mechanic to the noise mechanic was a complete reinvention of the franchise's core design philosophy. Everything you had learned across the previous 10 games, how to manage your gaze, how to track visual threats, how to navigate by looking at the floor, was irrelevant. Now you had to think in sound, move slowly, place items carefully, test floorboards before committing your weight to them, plan routes that avoided the noisiest parts of the house. The house itself was an iconic location, filled with crawl spaces and hidden rooms and death traps, including a guillotine and a giant spider lurking in the basement that would kill you independently of Granny if you stumbled into its territory. It was a global phenomenon almost immediately. But what made it more than just a viral hit was a secret hidden in an attic room. Place a teddy bear in a crib, and Slendrina's ghost appears. Right there, in Granny's house, the ghost of the girl from the 2013 basement materialized and confirmed what the lore had been building toward. Same world, same family, same curse. Granny was Slendrina's grandmother. 10 games, 4 years, and it all connected in a single moment in an attic room that most players discovered by accident. Granny. Chapter 2, 2019. If the first Granny game was a revelation, Chapter 2 was a masterclass in making something already difficult exponentially harder. The introduction of Grandpa changed everything about how the game had to be played. Where Granny was blind but heard everything, Grandpa was deaf but had exceptional vision and was extraordinarily fast and physically powerful. 2 hunters, 2 completely different sets of rules, 1 house. Staying quiet kept you safe from Granny. Staying out of sight kept you safe from Grandpa. But staying quiet often meant moving slowly, and moving slowly meant staying visible for longer, which meant more exposure to Grandpa. And moving quickly to get out of his sightline often meant making noise, which meant alerting Granny. The 2 rule systems were in constant tension with each other, and managing that tension across a larger house with more rooms and more complex escape routes was genuinely demanding in a way that elevated the entire experience. The escape options expanded to include a boat and a helicopter, and the inclusion of security cameras and a giant octopus in the basement showed the developer pushing the concept toward more ambitious and over-the-top horror elements, while keeping the core stealth mechanics grounded and consistent. But the lore reveal in Chapter 2 was the most significant the series had produced since the portrait in House of Slendrina. In the attic, locked inside a wooden crate, you found Nosferatu, the vampire figure who had appeared in the forest, the father of Slendrina's baby, imprisoned by Granny and Grandpa. The implications were enormous. Granny and Grandpa were not just grandparents living in a house where bad things happened. They were architects of this situation. They had imprisoned the father of their great-grandchild. They were in control of the family in ways that went far beyond anything the games had previously suggested. They were not victims of the curse. They were enforcers of it. Granny 3, 2021. And that brings us to where the franchise currently stands. a fortified mansion, a drawbridge, a moat. The kind of location that communicates immediately that whatever is happening inside is meant to be permanent. Granny 3 is the culmination of everything the series has built across a decade and 13 games. Granny is here. Grandpa is here with his shotgun, making the outdoor sections of the mansion genuinely lethal in ways the previous games never managed. And Slendrina is here. Back to her roots, back to the rule that started everything. Look at her and you die. 3 hunters, 3 completely different sets of rules. 1 location. To survive Granny 3, you have to hold in your head simultaneously every lesson the franchise has taught you since 2013. The gaze management from the original games, the noise discipline from the first Granny, the visibility awareness from Chapter 2, the puzzle solving from Slendrina X. All of it active at once in the most complex and demanding environment the series has ever constructed. It is brutal, it is occasionally overwhelming, and it is the most rewarding game developer has ever made because of it. But beyond the mechanics, seeing this family together in one place carries a weight that is difficult to fully articulate if you have followed the series from the beginning. The ghostly girl from the 2013 basement, the portrait that revealed her father, the asylum that revealed her tragedy, the forest that revealed her husband, the crate in the attic that revealed who was really in control. All of it culminates here in this mansion, with this family, in this moment. The whole decade lands at once, and that is the Slendrina and Granny franchise. One family, 13 games, and a story that grew from a simple jump scare in a dark basement into something that genuinely rewards the people who stayed with it from the very beginning.